She was just a tired single mom, scraping by on tips and late shifts, until her daughter, with innocent eyes and a trembling voice, asked a stranger in a suit, "Will you be my dad, just for today?" What neither of them knew was that the man she asked wasn't just any stranger. He was a billionaire CEO with a broken past of his own. And the moment he said yes, none of their lives would ever be the same. The morning was crisp, the air carrying that faint scent of spring that hinted the cold was finally loosening its grip. The city bustled as usual, cars honking, people rushing past, coffee cups in hand. But to 9-year-old Ellie Carson, the world felt still, heavy with something she couldn't quite explain. She stood near the corner bakery, holding a construction paper card she'd made in class, decorated with hearts and the words, "My dad, my hero," scribbled in crayon. Only she didn't have a dad, at least not one who ever came around. All she had was the story she made up in her heart, a story about a brave, kind father who loved her, protected her, and would never leave. Today was the school's annual Father's Day assembly. Most kids would bring their dads to school for donuts, a little performance, and a student-written speech. Ellie's class was even doing a My Dad showcase, where students stood up and shared something about their fathers. Ellie had signed up anyway, because something deep inside her refused to be left out. But now, with only 2 hours left before the assembly, she had no one to bring. She stood on the sidewalk clutching her card, watching people pass by. Most didn't even look at her. But then she saw him, tall, well-dressed, a sleek navy suit, polished shoes, a phone in one hand and coffee in the other. He looked important, like the kind of man who had meetings in skyscrapers and people who called him Sir. But more importantly, there was something gentle in the way he paused before crossing the street to help a woman gather spilled groceries. That made Ellie's heart pound. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir?" Her voice was small. The man, Evan Colton, CEO of Colton Dynamics, though she didn't know that, turned with a start, looking down at the little girl standing just below his waistline. "Yes?" he asked, puzzled. Ellie looked up at him with wide, nervous eyes and blurted out, "Would you pretend to be my dad, just for today?" For a moment, Evan didn't speak. He glanced around, as if someone might appear to claim her, but no one came. Just this small girl, wearing a hand-me-down dress and hope in her expression. I, I'm sorry," he said gently. Ellie bit her lip, clutching the card tighter. "It's Father's Day at my school. I need someone to come with me. Just for today. You don't have to say anything. Just be there." Evan's mind whirled. He had a meeting in 45 minutes, a conference call in an hour. This wasn't on his schedule. And yet, something in her tone, her bravery, stopped him. He crouched to her level. "Where's your mom?" "She's working. She couldn't come either. It's just, I don't want to be the only one without someone. Everyone else has a dad, or a stepdad, or an uncle." She glanced down. "I have no one." Evan looked at her card, bent at the corners from being held so tightly. He saw the ink stains on her fingers, the scraped knees, the slightly oversized backpack slung over one shoulder. Something stirred in him, something old, forgotten. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ellie. Ellie Carson." He nodded slowly. "Well, Ellie Carson, I guess I could spare an hour." Her face lit up like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Really?" He smiled faintly. "Lead the way." And just like that, they walked side by side down the sidewalk, a strange and quiet pair. He, a man used to boardrooms and balance sheets. She, a girl who had just asked a stranger to pretend to love her for a day. Neither of them knew that this moment, this small, brave request, was about to change both of their lives forever. Ellie led Evan through the school gates like a child guiding someone into a sacred place. Her steps were quicker now, more confident, the nerves of earlier smoothed by the simple miracle that someone had said yes. Evan followed behind, quietly taking in his surroundings, the worn playground equipment, the laughter of children echoing through the hallways, the faded posters on the walls reminding students to be kind and always try your best. It had been decades since he'd set foot in a place like this, and everything felt oddly smaller, more fragile, more real than the steel and glass boardrooms he was used to. Inside the front office, Ellie politely introduced him to the school receptionist. "This is my dad," she said, her voice steady. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Carson." Evan didn't correct her. He simply smiled and nodded. "Pleasure's mine." A teacher guided them down the corridor to the gymnasium where the assembly was being held. Rows of folding chairs were already filling up with fathers in weekend polos and button-downs, children bouncing beside them. Laughter rang out, loud and proud. Every few feet, Evan noticed another pair, fathers and sons tossing footballs in the air, girls proudly wearing matching shirts with their dads. He felt out of place in his expensive suit, but Ellie didn't seem to notice or care. She just looked up at him and smiled. They took their seats near the middle of the crowd, Ellie sitting so close her shoulder pressed against his arm. She was buzzing with nervous excitement. "We're doing speeches today," she whispered. "I signed up." "You're speaking?" he asked. She nodded. "Just a short story about my dad." Evan felt something inside him shift. She had planned to go up there alone, to speak about a father who didn't exist. And now, he was here. The lights dimmed. The principal welcomed the room, made a few awkward dad jokes, and then the students began lining up near the microphone one by one. Ellie's name was called halfway through the list. She stood slowly, clutching her card in both hands. Her steps were slower now. Her nerves returned. Evan watched her make her way to the stage, small and serious under the bright gym lights. The room hushed as she unfolded her paper and took a breath. "My name is Ellie Carson," she began, "and this is my story about my dad." She paused. The microphone hummed softly. "I've never met my real dad. He left before I was born. But that didn't stop me from imagining what he'd be like. I always pictured someone kind, who makes people smile, someone who helps others, even if it's not easy, someone who shows up, even if it's just for one day." She glanced out over the audience and found Evan's eyes. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Today, he showed up, and that means more than anything else. The room was silent. A few parents wiped their eyes. One dad patted another's back. Ellie gave a small nod, folded her paper, and walked back to her seat, where Evan was frozen. When she sat down, she leaned her head against his arm without a word. He placed his hand gently on top of hers. He wasn't sure what he had expected this day to be. A favor, a distraction from his tight schedule. But as he sat in that folding chair, with Ellie pressed against his side, Evan Colton, man of mergers and quarterly reports, felt the walls he had spent years building quietly begin to fall. For the first time in a very long time, he felt something deeper than success, something almost like belonging. The school assembly ended with applause and cheerful chatter as children swarmed their dads, laughing and tugging at their hands. Ellie didn't say much after her speech. She simply stayed close to Evan, clutching the small gift bag the school had handed out to students and their Father's Day guests. Inside was a handmade cookie and a popsicle stick picture frame she'd crafted. Earlier that week, she pulled it out, showing it to Evan. "I left the picture blank," she said shyly. "I didn't know who to put in it." Evan looked down at the glitter-covered frame with a lump forming in his throat. He didn't know what to say, so instead he reached into his inside jacket pocket, took out his business card, and gently placed it behind the frame as a placeholder. Ellie smiled. Now it has something. Outside the school, parents filtered into cars and waved goodbye. Evan hesitated. This was the moment where, logically, he was supposed to say goodbye, return to his office, resume the day like it hadn't happened. But he couldn't make himself move. Not with Ellie looking up at him like that, not with the heaviness in his chest. "Would it be all right if I walked you home?" he asked, unsure if he was crossing a line. Ellie's face lit up. "Yes, Mom will be done with her shift soon." They walked through the neighborhood slowly. Evan noticed how Ellie avoided cracks in the sidewalk, how she waved at a tabby cat sleeping on a windowsill, how she carried her bag like it was the most precious thing in the world. She chattered now, about school, about her favorite books, about how she once won second place in a spelling bee and got a coupon for free fries. Eventually, they reached a worn brick building. The front steps had chipped paint, and a potted plant sat on its side, half dead. Ellie climbed up and fished a key from the hidden corner of the mailbox. "You live here?" Evan asked gently. She nodded. It's not big, but it's home. He paused before she opened the door. Do you mind if I say hello to your mom? Ellie hesitated. She might be tired. I'll just say thank you, he offered. Inside, the apartment was small but clean. A couch with a knitted blanket, a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, a drawing of Ellie's hand traced in marker, taped to the fridge. The smell of something simple cooking, rice maybe, still hung faintly in the air. The front door clicked open again, and a woman stepped inside, soaked from the light drizzle that had begun outside. She was in her late 20s wearing a bakery apron, her hair pulled into a messy bun. The exhaustion in her eyes faded instantly when she saw Evan standing in her living room. Ellie, she said slowly, eyes narrowing with confusion and concern. Who is this? Ellie jumped up. Mom, this is Mr. Colton. He came to school with me today. For Father's Day. The woman stiffened, her eyes flicking between the two of them. You what? Evan took a step forward and extended his hand. I'm sorry, this must be very strange. Your daughter asked me to pretend to be her father today. I didn't plan it, but I was honored. She's incredible. The woman blinked, stunned. You just agreed. A total stranger? I'm not dangerous, Evan said calmly. Though, I suppose every dangerous person says that. She stared at him. You're that Evan Colton, aren't you? From Colton Dynamics? He nodded, almost embarrassed. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Then she sighed and slowly shook his hand. Grace Carson. I just wanted to make sure she got home safely. And thank you for raising someone so fearless. Grace looked at Ellie, who smiled sweetly and clutched the popsicle stick frame. Grace's face softened just a little. I should be thanking you, she said. You made her feel seen today. That doesn't happen often. Evan looked at both of them and smiled. If it's all right, I'd like to see her again sometime, as a friend, or whatever you feel is appropriate. Grace didn't answer immediately, but she didn't say no either. Let's see, she finally said. But thank you, truly. Evan left that night with a heart fuller than he remembered it could be. The boardrooms could wait. Something more important had just begun. The days that followed drifted by with a strange, unspoken rhythm. Evan couldn't stop thinking about Ellie. The way she had stood on that stage, clutching her paper with shaking fingers, but speaking with a voice full of hope, it echoed in his mind more than any investor, call, or executive summary ever had. At the office, he was distracted. His assistant, Marlene, noticed immediately. You've stared at that same report for 20 minutes, she said on Tuesday morning, folding her arms. Either the numbers are speaking in tongues, or your brain is somewhere else. Evan smiled faintly, setting the report down. Do you know what a 9-year-old girl taught me last week? Marlene raised an eyebrow. You're going to tell me either way. That showing up, just showing up, can mean the world. He didn't elaborate, but she gave him a knowing look anyway. She'd worked for him for years. She could tell something inside him had shifted. That evening, Evan called Grace. She hesitated when she answered. Is everything okay? Yes, he said, his voice warm. I was wondering if I could take Ellie out this Saturday, just for a couple hours. Maybe ice cream or a bookstore, somewhere she likes. There was a long pause. Grace's voice was cautious but not cold. You're not obligated to keep this going. She understands. You did more than enough already. I want to, he said simply. She's special. Grace sighed quietly. She hasn't stopped talking about you since that day. I've never seen her that light before. So, okay, but just somewhere close. And you call if anything feels off. Of course. Saturday came with clear skies and sunshine. Evan arrived in jeans and a casual button-up, ditching the suit for the first time in public in years. He looked almost out of place standing on Grace's doorstep, holding 2 cones of mint chocolate chip from the local parlor just down the street. Ellie answered the door barefoot, in a sundress and tangled hair. Her face lit up when she saw him. You came. You doubted me? He said, mock-insulted. She grinned. A little. They spent the next 2 hours walking through the park, sitting under a tree by the duck pond, Ellie talking endlessly about her favorite books, her dreams of becoming a vet, and her very serious opinion that math was evil and unnecessary. Evan listened like no one else ever had. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't half present. He was there, with her, entirely. As the sun dipped lower, they passed a small community bookstore. Ellie pressed her face to the window. I love it in there, but we don't buy books much. Mommy says the library's enough. Evan gently opened the door. Then today the books are on me. Inside, she was like a child at Christmas, carefully touching spines, flipping through pages, reading aloud bits of stories. Evan watched her and thought, how is she this resilient, this whole? She chose a single book, a hardcover collection of bedtime animal stories. Mom reads to me every night, she said, but this one she hasn't read yet. When Evan walked her back, Grace was waiting by the door. She looked between the two of them, Ellie's radiant smile, Evan's soft expression, and her face tightened. She had a good time, Grace said flatly. She's incredible, Evan replied. You've done a beautiful job with her. Grace hesitated, then in a quieter voice, she's been through more than you know. Evan nodded. I'd like to be in her life. With your permission. No obligations, no press. Just support. Grace folded her arms. You're a CEO. You could be anyone's hero. Why hers? He looked down at Ellie, who was now flipping through her new book on the porch step. Because she asked me to be. And I realized I never knew what I was missing until I said yes. Grace didn't speak for a moment. Then she gave the smallest of nods. We'll take it one day at a time. As Evan walked back to his car, he knew something was changing in him, something permanent. He wasn't sure what this was yet, what role he was truly stepping into. But one thing was certain. He was no longer just pretending to show up for Ellie. He was already all in. A week passed, then two. What started as a single act of kindness was quietly evolving into something none of them had expected. Evan found himself rearranging meetings and skipping networking events just to spend an extra hour with Ellie at the park or reading to her at the local library. Grace noticed the changes too. How Ellie smiled more easily now, how she no longer flinched when Father's Day was mentioned, how she woke up early on Saturdays just in case Mr. Evan dropped by. Evan had never been the kind of man to slow down. For most of his adult life, time was money, and every minute had been accounted for. But now in the quiet mornings with Ellie, helping her build a model volcano or listening to her explain why dragons should be real, he found something rare, peace. Grace, however, remained cautious. She appreciated everything Evan was doing, but she had lived too many hard years to trust a man with power and charm so quickly. He wasn't just stepping into her daughter's life, he was stepping into hers, and she didn't know what to do with that. One Friday evening, Grace got off her shift early from the bakery. She didn't expect Evan to be at the apartment, but as she turned the corner onto their block, she saw his sleek black car parked at the curb. Her heart jumped. When she walked through the door, she heard laughter, deep, genuine laughter, from both Evan and Ellie. She stepped into the living room and found them sprawled across the floor with colored pencils and sketch pads, drawing imaginary animals. Ellie was holding up a picture of a flying cat with butterfly wings. Evan's was an elephant in a superhero cape. Yours is ridiculous, Ellie giggled. Says the girl who made a cat with 10 legs. Grace leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching for a moment before clearing her throat. Both of them looked up. Hi, Mom, Ellie chirped. Evan got to his feet quickly, brushing eraser bits from his pants. I hope it's okay. She invited me in after the bookstore. Grace gave a slow nod. It's fine. I just didn't expect you. I can go if you'd prefer. No, she said too quickly, then added more gently. It's all right. You can stay for dinner, if you want. They cooked together in the small kitchen. It was tight and a little chaotic, but there was laughter and warmth in the air. Evan chopped vegetables while Ellie stirred pasta, and Grace, reluctantly amused, teased Evan about not knowing how to dice an onion properly. After Ellie went to bed, the apartment quieted. Grace made tea and they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. For the first time, without her daughter between them, the space felt intimate. You've done a lot for her, Grace said, eyes steady. More than anyone ever has. I don't want to sound ungrateful. You don't, Evan said. You sound like a mother who's been carrying everything by herself. Grace gave a small, weary smile. That's because I have. There was a pause. Then Evan leaned forward. You don't have to anymore. Grace looked down at her tea. Her voice was softer now. I'm not used to letting people in. Especially people like you. He didn't take offense. People like me? Rich, powerful, men who are used to getting what they want. Her eyes flicked up. You scare me a little. Evan's voice was quiet. I scare myself sometimes. She blinked at him. I didn't think I had space for this. For her. For this feeling. But every time I'm around Ellie, I remember what it's like to matter to someone for who you are, not what you can provide. Grace swallowed hard. I want to believe you. Then give me the chance to prove it. Not with words. With time. They sat in silence for a few beats. The only sound the faint humming of the refrigerator. Finally, Grace nodded. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't surrender. It was something in between. And for Evan, it was enough. As he left that night, Grace walked him to the door. Before he stepped out, he paused and looked back at her. She's an amazing little girl. She's everything to me. She's starting to be everything to me, too, he said quietly. And then he was gone. Grace stood there for a long while after the door closed, her heart heavy and light all at once. Something was changing, and she didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt less alone in it. The rain came suddenly that Tuesday afternoon, turning the sidewalks into mirrors and the sky into a dull canvas of gray. Grace stood at the front window, her apron dusted with flour, watching the droplets chase each other down the glass. The bakery had closed early due to a power flicker, and for once, she was home ahead of Ellie. She looked forward to hearing her daughter's stories about the day, about science projects and spelling games, and whether she'd gotten to sit next to her friend Chloe at lunch. But the call came first. It was from the school nurse. Ellie had fainted during gym class. Her temperature had spiked without warning, and she'd been taken to the hospital for evaluation. Grace's heart dropped. She didn't even grab her umbrella. She just ran. When she arrived at the hospital, soaked and breathless, Ellie was already in a small room, pale and shivering beneath thin blankets. A nurse stood beside her, adjusting monitors. She's stable, the nurse said, but the doctors are running tests. We're monitoring for signs of an autoimmune response. Grace clutched her daughter's tiny hand and brushed back the sweat-matted curls. Hey, baby, she whispered, trying to smile. Ellie stirred and blinked up at her. Mommy, I feel funny. I know, sweetheart. They're going to make you better. Behind her, footsteps approached. Grace turned to see Evan standing in the doorway, hair damp from the rain, eyes filled with alarm. I came as soon as I heard, he said. The school called me too. I listed myself as an emergency contact last week, just in case. Grace nodded quickly. Thank you for coming. He stepped closer, looking down at Ellie with deep concern. How is she? They don't know yet, Grace said, her voice breaking. She just collapsed. I'll pay for whatever she need, he said immediately. Tests, specialists, anything. Grace started to object, but then stopped. Her pride was no longer more important than her daughter's life. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together in that sterile room for hours. Evan held Ellie's hand when Grace needed to step out. Grace refilled his coffee when he refused to leave her side. When the doctor finally returned, his face was serious, but not panicked. She has a rare inflammatory response, likely triggered by a viral infection. It's treatable, but she needs careful monitoring and medication. We'll keep her overnight. Grace exhaled slowly, her hand trembling against her lips. Evan placed a hand on her back, steadying her. She's going to be okay, he said gently. That night, Grace dozed in a chair beside Ellie's bed, but Evan didn't sleep. He watched over the little girl with the kind eyes and fierce heart and thought about how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change. At around 2 a.m., Ellie stirred. Her voice was groggy. Is that you, Mr. Evan? He leaned over. It's me, sweetheart. I had a dream you were my real dad, she whispered, and you stayed. Evan felt something crack open inside his chest. I'm still here, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. A soft smile touched her lips before she drifted back to sleep. In that moment, Evan didn't care about deadlines or board meetings or stockholders. None of that meant anything next to this child, this brave, brilliant child who had chosen him, who had loved him not for his money or his title, but for something much simpler, his presence. And now he knew there was no pretending anymore. He was her father in every way that mattered. And from that moment forward, he would do whatever it took to prove it. Ellie's recovery was slow, but steady. She spent 4 more days in the hospital, each one filled with medications, IV drips, soft blankets, and an endless stream of picture books. Grace hardly left her side, except to shower and eat. Evan came every morning and stayed until late into the night, only leaving when Grace insisted he needed rest too. The nurses started to assume he was family. One of them even smiled knowingly and called him Dad without hesitation. Evan didn't correct her. By the 5th day, Ellie was sitting up in bed with color returning to her cheeks. She had her favorite plush toy, an old floppy lamb named Buttons, tucked under one arm, and she was explaining the plot of her new favorite book to Evan, who listened like it was a corporate strategy presentation. She escapes the castle using a spoon and a shoelace, Ellie said proudly, because she's really smart and doesn't give up, even when people say she's just a kid. Evan smiled. Sounds like someone I know. Grace watched them from the doorway with a strange flutter in her chest. A part of her still didn't understand how they'd gotten here. Just weeks ago, she and Ellie had been alone. Always alone. And now, she wasn't sure what this was, but it was more than a friendship, more than casual support. Evan had become a part of their lives in a way that felt deeper than words. Later that afternoon, after a round of final tests, the doctor gave them the news they'd all been hoping for. Ellie could go home in the morning. When Grace walked Evan to the elevator, she hesitated before speaking. "I meant what I said. You didn't have to stay through all this." "I know," Evan said softly, "but I wanted to. I needed to." She looked at him, searching for signs of guilt, of obligation, of some hidden motive. But all she saw was sincerity, and something else, something that scared her a little: permanence. "I'm not good at this," she admitted. "Letting someone in, letting someone stay." Evan nodded. "I'm not good at it either. But maybe we don't have to be perfect. Maybe we just have to try." She exhaled slowly, looking down. "You're becoming important to her. To me. I already care about her like she's my own," he said. "And I care about you too." Her eyes met his. The hallway was quiet, the sterile lights humming above them. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I'm scared of losing it." "Then let's not rush it," Evan said gently. "Let's just take the next step together, whatever it looks like." That night, Evan went home and opened his laptop, not to review spreadsheets or project briefs, but to start something personal. He began drafting a legal inquiry about guardianship rights, not to take Ellie away, never that, but to ask what his role could legally become if Grace ever wanted him to stay in Ellie's life long term. Meanwhile, back in their apartment, Grace tucked Ellie into bed with her usual kiss on the forehead and then sat awake for hours, staring at the soft glow of the lamp. Her thoughts were tangled, but her heart was strangely calm. She didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like she was walking it alone. And in the other room, Ellie slept peacefully, whispering in her dreams about castles, shoelaces, and a man who had once been a stranger, but had become her hero. The morning sun poured softly through the curtains of Grace and Ellie's small apartment, casting golden light across the kitchen table where a vase of flowers now stood, sent by Evan the day before with a note that simply read, "For the bravest girl I know." Grace poured 2 bowls of cereal, one with strawberries on top for Ellie. Just the way she liked it. The apartment felt different today, brighter, calmer, almost like a home that had exhaled a long-held breath. Ellie had returned from the hospital the day before, still tired but cheerful. She'd insisted on sleeping in her own bed again, with Buttons the lamb curled up beside her. That morning, as she came into the kitchen in her soft pajamas, she smiled and reached for her bowl. Her energy was still fragile, but she looked more like herself than she had in weeks. "Mommy," she said between spoonfuls, "is Mr. Evan coming today?" Grace smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "He said he'd stop by after lunch." Ellie grinned. "Can we show him the scrapbook we made?" "Absolutely." Just after 1, there was a knock at the door. Grace opened it to find Evan holding a large envelope in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "Lunch in legalese," he said, smiling. Grace raised an eyebrow. "That's a terrifying combination." He laughed softly and handed her the bag. Inside were gourmet sandwiches from a bistro across town and fresh lemonade. "Ellie's favorite," he said. They ate lunch on the living room floor like a picnic, with Ellie curled up between them, showing Evan the scrapbook she and her mom had been working on. It was filled with photos, doodles, handwritten notes, and a new page she had added that said, "My real-life hero, Mr. Evan." He stared at that page for a long time. After they cleaned up, Evan asked if he could speak to Grace alone for a moment. Ellie, tired from the day, went to lie down with her storybook, content and sleepy. In the kitchen, Evan set the envelope on the table. "I've been thinking about this every day," he said. "I don't want to overstep, and I don't want to make any decisions without your full comfort. But I talked to a lawyer." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "I'm not asking to take anything away from you," he continued. "You're her mother. You've raised her with strength and love. But if something ever happened, if she ever needed emergency care or support, I want to be there officially. I want to have the legal right to help." He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was paperwork for shared guardianship, limited and flexible, written in a way that left full control with Grace unless she chose otherwise. Grace's hands trembled as she picked it up. "You would really do this?" "I already feel like she's mine," Evan said. "This just makes it real and safe for all of us." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "This isn't just about Ellie, is it?" He shook his head. "No, it's about you, too. I care about both of you, and I don't want to be a chapter in your lives. I want to be there for the whole story." Tears brimmed in Grace's eyes, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, trust, hope. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do this together." That evening, they sat on the couch as a family. Ellie fell asleep between them, head on Evan's arm, her tiny hand clutching Grace's fingers. Evan looked at Grace, and she looked back, both of them silent in their gratitude. Outside, the rain had begun to fall again. But inside, everything was warm. They had no roadmap, no perfect plan. But for the first time in their lives, none of them felt alone. They had each other now, and that was enough to face whatever came next. As the author of this story, I believe the ending is not just satisfying, it's profoundly hopeful. It illustrates how the simplest acts of compassion can open the door to healing, love, and belonging, even between strangers. What began as a little girl's innocent request turned into a complete transformation for all three characters. Ellie found the father figure she'd only dreamed of. Grace discovered the strength to trust again. And Evan, successful but emotionally detached, finally learned what it meant to be truly needed. The beauty of the ending lies in its realism. Not everything is wrapped up with a perfect bow, but the characters choose each other despite uncertainty. That's what makes it powerful. It's not a fairy tale. It's a story about real courage, emotional risk, and building a chosen family when life hasn't been fair. And in a world often full of disconnect and loneliness, I think we need more stories like this, where love finds its way in through the unexpected.